You're on a Zoom call, camera on, smile calibrated. Someone says, "Could you also take this on?" And you hear yourself reply, "Sure." Not because you want to, because your mouth has learned the workplace version of politeness. Then the call ends, and you stare at your calendar like it's a scoreboard you didn't agree to play in. And for a second, you're not even sure what you just agreed to, the task or the version of yourself that keeps saying yes. Here's the paradox. Doing less can look like giving up, but for a lot of people, it's actually an attempt to stop being consumed. This video isn't about work ethic. It's about identity. What happens when you decide your job can be something you do without becoming who you are? And near the end, I'll explain why quiet quitting will probably outlive the trend word itself, because it's describing a deeper shift we don't have a better label for yet. Act 1 is the surface behavior, because the term got popular for a reason. In everyday language, quiet quitting usually means you do what your role requires, no less, but you stop volunteering for extra work, stop staying late by default, stop treating every request like a test of character. Public definitions often boil it down to meeting the basic expectations without the above and beyond performance. And online, you'll see the split. Some people hear that and translate it as doing the minimum so you don't get fired, while others hear it as just doing your job like a normal person. That argument is the whole point, because it reveals that modern work isn't only a contract, it's a social meaning system. The same behavior, logging off on time, can read as healthy boundaries in one story and as disengagement in another. Which story does your workplace tell? Have you ever felt judged for not doing extra? Micro example 1. A group chat at work lights up at 6:12 p.m. Client needs a quick slide refresh tonight. One person answers immediately, "On it." Another reacts with a thumbs up, but doesn't volunteer. The next morning, the slide deck exists, the meeting happens, and nothing explodes. But the social memory forms anyway. Who jumped, who didn't. That's not just workload, that's reputation math. Now notice the quiet detail. The pressure isn't always a direct order. It's the implied expectation that the best employees are the ones who treat extra as normal. When extra becomes the baseline, refusing extra looks like a statement. There's also a quieter emotional layer. When you stop over-investing, you don't just change your schedule, you change your story about who you are allowed to be on a weekday. And stories, more than policies, are what coworkers react to. Pattern interrupt. What if the real conflict isn't effort versus laziness, but identity versus extraction? Act 2 is the mechanism underneath. Boundaries aren't just personal preferences, they're norms. Most workplaces run on extra role behavior, the invisible layer where people do things not written in the job description. Staying late to help, taking on tasks temporarily, being available, responding fast, absorbing ambiguity. For years, hustle culture didn't merely celebrate that layer, it moralized it. It turned intensity into proof of worth. The message wasn't only work hard, it was your career is your value. When that moral frame is in the air, opting out doesn't feel like a neutral adjustment. It feels like a break in loyalty, either from the company's perspective or from your own previous self. So quiet quitting becomes a kind of boundary reset, a decision to stop donating identity to the role. Not quitting the job, quitting the idea that your output is yourself. Micro summary. Quiet quitting is less a drop in performance and more a shift in what work is allowed to mean. Keep that in mind, because the cultural part explains why it surged now. Here's how the loop tends to form. Signal to interpretation to behavior. The signal is simple. I stopped doing extra. The interpretation is where the tension lives. If I'm not going above and beyond, what does that say about me? Or from the outside, if they're not going above and beyond, what does that say about them? Then behavior follows. People either overperform to avoid that interpretation, or they detach to escape it. And that's why the term is so emotionally charged. It touches a status system. In many professional environments, the fastest way to signal commitment is not quality, it's availability. It's the willingness to be interrupted. It's the speed of your sure. Act 3 is the cultural logic, why this is happening now and why it maps onto identity. Start with the last decade's story. Many millennials entered adulthood inside a loud narrative. Build a personal brand, optimize, side hustle, love the grind, turn passion into income, turn income into identity. Then, reality arrived. Rising costs, unstable ladders, constant reorgs, work moving into the phone, the home, the weekend. When the boundary between life and work dissolves, the only remaining boundary is psychological, what you refuse to let define you. At the same time, digital work made performance more visible and more abstract. Your labor becomes tickets closed, messages answered, green dots, response time, visibility. Those metrics can be useful, but they also create a feeling that you are always being measured, even when nobody is explicitly measuring you. When identity is built inside a dashboard, detachment becomes a form of self-protection. Because your nervous system doesn't understand dashboards, it understands tension. It understands the feeling of being on even when you're technically off. And when performance becomes constant visibility, the body starts looking for somewhere to hide. Pattern interrupt. The twist is that boundaries have become a status signal too. Because now we're in an era where saying, "I'm setting boundaries," can read as maturity, but it can also read as withdrawal. We're trying to hold two cultural values at once, be a whole person and be relentlessly responsive. And those values collide in the exact same moment, when someone asks for more than the role promised. Micro example 2. A manager messages at 9:47 p.m. Quick question. The employee sees it, doesn't answer, and replies at 8:32 a.m. Morning, what's up? No drama, no confrontation. But the manager's story might be, they're not committed, while the employee's story might be, my phone isn't a leash. Same exchange, two moral universes. Micro summary. This isn't only about workload, it's about competing social codes. One code treats availability as care, the other treats boundaries as dignity. So what changes when quiet quitting becomes normal? The image of the good worker shifts. It used to be the one who says yes, absorbs chaos, and makes the system feel stable. Increasingly, good is splitting into two versions, good for the company and good for the self. And when those don't align, people feel a subtle identity friction. If I stop performing devotion, will I become invisible? And if I become invisible, what does that say about my value? For many people, the fear isn't losing the job. It's losing proof that they matter. This friction doesn't always show up as conflict. Often it shows up as silence, as restraint, as the quiet decision not to volunteer again. And sometimes it shows up as guilt. You log off on time and still feel slightly wrong. You don't answer at night, and your brain keeps rehearsing the justification. That's identity friction, not laziness, not rebellion, just a nervous system adjusting to a new story about who you're allowed to be. And that subtle shift is what makes it powerful. This is why the conversation gets messy online. Some people are defending a moral order where effort earns security. Others are noticing that security doesn't reliably show up, even when effort is extreme. In that environment, doing just the job becomes an identity statement. I will participate, but I won't worship. Micro summary. Quiet quitting is a reframe of adulthood at work. Less, my job is my life. More, my job is one role among many. And that reframe changes the signals we send. Finale. Here's the meaning underneath, and it's where the open loop resolves. Quiet quitting isn't primarily about quitting. It's about detaching your sense of self from a system that learned to treat your extra effort as free inventory. Once above and beyond becomes expected, it stops being a gift and starts being rent. And people eventually stop paying rent on an identity they never owned. Key insight. The reason this will outlive the phrase quiet quitting is that it names a bigger transition, from hustle culture's identity model, career equals self-worth, to a boundary model where identity has to survive outside the job. In that transition, doing the work without being the work isn't apathy. It's a new kind of social line, a signal that you're still participating, but you're no longer offering your whole self as proof. If you felt that tension between being reliable and being consumed, when did you first notice it? Did it feel like relief, guilt, or exhaustion? How would you define quiet quitting in one sentence? Not academically, but personally. Leave a comment with the most accurate one-sentence definition you've heard, even if you disagree with it. Thanks for watching. If you like unpacking the quiet psychological shifts shaping modern life, subscribe. We're building a space to look at these changes without panic, but without pretending they're small.